2021 Kenworth T680. I'm going to show you two identical units, both 2021, both with the same kilometers, but one truck is going to be selling for $20,000 less than the second one. So I'd love to understand why. We got the PACCAR engine over here, and now we got to go find the same identical unit with a Cummins engine. Let's get into it. Now here we have a 2021 Kenworth T680 with the Cummins engine, the X15. Now this truck over here, even though they are two identical trucks, this one here is going to sell for about $20,000 more than the one with the PACCAR engine. We're going to go into the Ritchie Brothers auctions. We're going to see how much more do the Cummins engines sell than the PACCAR, and then I'm going to save for last on why. What is it about the Cummins engine or why the PACCAR engine is selling for so much less, and we'll get ChatGPT into this conversation also. Let's get into it. Okay, so you guys see my screen? We have filtered out all the 2021 Kenworth T680s that have sold over the last few months at the Ritchie Brothers auctions. Now, we're gonna go into them and see what they sold for. So here, the first one that we're looking at sold for $102,000. It was with 465,000 kilometers. It does not say the engine type. The first two don't say the engine type, but I'm guessing with the value that it sold for, they are for sure the Cummins engines. So let's look at number three. Number three here sold for $48,000 in Nisku, Alberta, with 896,000 kilometers. That was a Cummins engine, sold for $48,000. Now again, we're only looking at the 2021 models. So you can see here, let's just make a quick list. $48,000 for 896,000. Now guys, this is kilometers and this is the Canadian auction. I did not do the US. All right, let's look at the next one. 2021 Kenworth T680 sold in Bolton, 370,000 kilometers, like a brand new truck, sold for 106. Also, it says here Cummins X15. Now, here is a perfect comparison. A PACCAR engine is the next one, sold for $55,000 with 672,000 kilometers. Let's see if we can get an exact comparison. All right, so you can see here 2021 in Quebec sold for $24,500. This white one over here, it had 647,000 kilometers. Now we have a next one. That is our perfect comparison, okay? So here we have a Cummins X15 500 horsepower engine sold for $45,000 and it has 825,000 kilometers. Now you can see here the next one has a PACCAR engine sold for $29,000. So do you see the difference? The truck over here, lot number 267, sold for $45,000. And now you can see all these red and white ones that sold for $29,000, $34,000, $36,000, and for $22,000. So there's a very, very big difference between the trucks that have the Cummins versus the trucks that have the PACCAR engine. Let's see if we can have more of a comparison. Here we go. Sold for 1.1 million kilometers. These black ones over here, they sold for 41,000 and 35,000. The same 2021 Kenworth T680. Significant difference you can see with every single one of these trucks, okay, whether they have the PACCAR engine or if they have the Cummins engine. So here's another perfect comparison. So this one with 703,000 kilometers sold for only $22,500. Now that has a PACCAR engine. Now if we look for a Cummins engine, here we go, 733,000 sold for $40,000. Okay, so there is our comparison. $40,000, 773,000 kilometers sold for 40, and then we had the other one that sold for 22,500. In this particular example, there was about $18,000 difference. Now, I'd really love to understand why in the world is this happening. So I'm gonna open up my good friend ChatGPT, and I'm gonna start talking to it. I'd like to know what's going on. Hey, how are you?
Hey there, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Hope you're doing well too. Let me know what's on your mind today.
I'd really like to understand why the 2021 T680 Kenworth sells for $20,000 more than when it has a Cummins engine versus when it has a PACCAR engine.
Absolutely, that's a good question, and it does come up a lot. So basically the reason the 2021 Kenworth T680 tends to have a higher resale value when it's equipped with a Cummins engine is really down to reputation over preference. Cummins engines have a really long-standing reputation for reliability and ease of maintenance, and a lot of mechanics and fleet managers are just more comfortable working on them. On the other hand, PACCAR engines, while they do have their fans, sometimes get a bit of a reputation for being expensive to service, and some drivers feel like they just don't perform quite the same over time. So that difference in resale value is really about buyer confidence and the broader market saying, hey, we know Cummins, we trust Cummins, and we're willing to work for it.
What is it that people are so dissatisfied with the PACCAR engine?
So a lot of the dissatisfaction with PACCAR engines comes down to a few key things that drivers and fleet owners mention. One is that some folks find the PACCAR engines a bit more finicky or complex when it comes to maintenance and repairs. That can mean higher repair costs or longer downtimes if a shop isn't as familiar with them. Another big thing is fuel economy and performance consistency. Some drivers feel like the PACCAR engines don't deliver quite as predictable fuel efficiency or might have more issues with emission systems like the EGR or aftertreatment. That can add to frustration over time. So it's not that they're inherently bad engines, it's just that the perception has built up that they can be a bit more of a headache compared to Cummins, and that's why you get that difference in satisfaction.
Now, did they always have this reputation?
Yeah, so this reputation kind of evolved over time. It's not like PACCAR engines were always seen this way from the start. Initially, when PACCAR introduced their own engines into the North American market, people were interested and curious. But as they started getting more widely used, that's when certain patterns started to emerge. Over the years, you had fleets and owner-operators noticing these differences in maintenance complexity or in fuel efficiency quirks, and that kind of led to the reputation we see now. In other words, it's been a gradual buildup. It wasn't always like this, but over the last decade or so, the market's just leaned more heavily toward Cummins because of those accumulated experiences.
Would you say the reputation has gotten worse and worse, or is it getting better?
I'd say it's a little bit of a mixed bag. In recent years, PACCAR has definitely worked on improving their engines and addressing some of the concerns that people had early on. So for newer models, you might hear a bit less negativity than you did a few years back, but reputations in the trucking world can be kind of sticky. So even if things are getting better, it can take a while for that perception to catch up. Overall, I'd say there's still a bit of a hill to climb, but it's not all doom and gloom. They are working on it, and some folks are starting to see improvements.
Now, what would PACCAR need to do in order to change this reputation?
Yeah, so to really shift that reputation, I think PACCAR would need to double down on a few fronts. One big one would be continuing to make their engines easier and more cost-effective to maintain. If they can reduce those maintenance complexities and make sure mechanics are really well trained and parts are more readily available, that would go a long way. They'd also probably benefit from some really strong marketing and customer support initiatives if they can highlight success stories, offer great warranty terms, and just show over time that they've really ironed out those kinks. People will start to trust them more.
Why would such a large corporation not do that already?
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. Big corporations sometimes have a lot of moving parts, and it can take longer than you'd think. For one, large companies have to navigate all sorts of internal processes, supply chains, and regulatory hurdles. And sometimes they're already invested in certain technologies or processes. It just takes time. Also, sometimes they might not fully realize how much of a perception issue there is until it really becomes a talking point in the bucket. And once they do, it still takes a while to roll out new training, new parts, new service networks, all that kind of stuff.
What percent of the Class 8 trucks have a Cummins engine versus the PACCAR engine?
In the used truck market, Cummins engines have typically had a pretty strong presence, somewhere around a quarter or more of the market share in older Class 8 trucks. PACCAR engines, on the other hand, have been a smaller slice, often just a single-digit percentage. Of course, these numbers can vary depending on the year and the source, but in general, Cummins tends to have a bigger footprint.
Would you say that the PACCAR engine, are they more geared towards fleets? Is that why they just don't care?
Yeah, you could say there's definitely a bit of a fleet-focused angle to it. PACCAR engines are pretty popular with large fleets because those fleets often have the resources and infrastructure to handle the maintenance quirks. They might have in-house mechanics who are trained specifically on PACCAR, or they get volume deals that make it worth it. So in a sense, yeah, PACCAR might prioritize those big fleet customers who buy in bulk and are less worried about individual driver preferences. And that might be part of why the reputation hasn't shifted as quickly, because their core audience is maybe a bit more tolerant of those issues. So it's a good observation.
Would you say more of the complaints that are coming in are from owner-operators or fleet owners, or a combination of both when it comes to the engine?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably a combination, but a lot of the louder complaints definitely tend to come from owner-operators. Owner-operators are basically money in the right business with their trucks, so fleet owners might have some of the same concerns, but they've got more resources to absorb those issues.
All right, I gotta say this thing is awesome. Definitely nailed it on the head, has all the right information. The only thing I didn't like was the stats, the 25% to single digits. I don't think they're that far off. I mean, definitely Cummins has, much more of the pie. I would say more of probably, 25% versus, 9%, 8% would be. But again, not 100% sure about that. But definitely Cummins has by far a much more market share than what the stats came in. Well, I'm very happy with the answers that ChatGPT gave me. I'd really love to hear some of your thoughts out there. Why do you think that the PACCAR, what kind of experiences have you had with the PACCAR engine for those of you that have it? Would you buy it again? Do you think they're gonna turn it around? Have they turned it around for those of you that are driving the 2024s or even 2025s? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. I'm Ronan, and I'll catch you in my next video.